Hello, it's Cryptolyze. I hope you are well on this Monday, 16 October 2023, and that you had a great weekend. We're starting this week with a lot of macro news. We're going to talk about the war, in any case, the escalation of the war and the possible world war which keeps coming up on the news. We will understand why, how, and analyze it in relation to what we have already experienced recently. I recall the Ukraine-Russia war, where we had approximately the same type of information. And we will end with the analysis of the little short squeeze that we had, and it starts right away. We're going to start the news with Grayscale, in which the SEC will not appeal the Grayscale lawsuit. I told you about it in the Saturday video. I invite you to go watch it. I will link it at the end of this video. There. Well, for me, I don't think it will change much. Yes, it is positive, but it is not transcendent. We will have to validate the requests in all cases. And it is not because, precisely, there was no appeal here that the other ETFs will be validated. That of Grayscale will be validated when we take a step back. It simply means that, yes, they are not going to go any further in the trial. But they can also find other reasons to extend it. To refused, there are plenty of elements in which, unfortunately, the SEC has the means to act. On the other hand, we have positive points, which is that some analysts consider that the various interactions between the SEC and the fund managers who requested the filing of these Bitcoin ETFs show that there is indeed something positive and that we are certainly moving towards validation, although I think it will not be validated in January. Macro level, we are going to have a week which will be relatively flat. We still have small elements with the September retail sales. Yes, we will have the building permits in September. Yes, which will allow us to validate is what yes or no the real estate market is holding in the USA. And we will end on Thursday, where we will certainly have a little bit of movement, Powell's speech, classic manufacturing indices. So on that, we will have the end of the analyses on the month of September. And so yes, we could have a little bit of movement on Thursday and Friday on the markets. Markets which are still really oriented towards the Middle East. So this is exactly what I explained to you in the introduction to this video. We have a market that will be really focused on the conflict that is gaining strength in the Middle East, in which we have the USA, which is obviously taking part. In terms of this notion, we are talking about Israel's war, in which Iran is taking part. And next to it, we have a communication from Ray Dalio in an interview who tells us that he considers that a 50% chance of finding himself in a world war, basically World War III. Communication, not from Ray Dalio, but that we had at that time when we had the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, so we already had these elements. And it's interesting to see the processing of information that we currently have in relation to the real typology of news and of interactions. Yes, there is a huge conflict. Yes, it risks accelerating. It risks having a very strong impact on the markets. But what has the most impact on the markets is clearly this type of news, this type of fear which is rising and escalating. And therefore, it will be interesting to follow what is happening on the markets, especially if we look at the level of the SPY 500, and that we take a little step back here. And we will mainly look for the news that we had February 2022, and there when we look at February 2022, we indeed had a bearish box followed by a rebound to then make a new bearish box with the increase in inflation and the crisis that we experienced at that period. But therefore we had an emotional impact followed by a readjustment of the price and either a real movement to do a retest or a bearish acceleration if ever we are in the typology of having uncontrolled impacts, in which we is clearly afraid that it will not be confined only to the Middle East and that there will be a widening of the conflict, in which there would also be a widening of the impacts on the financial markets, of course. So I'm taking advantage of this because as a result, I talked about Red Alio, which is a bit of a specialist in shorts, and to talk about a change in the communication rules, which takes place 34 months after the release in place of the GameStop short squeeze. GameStop was an asset that was shorted by many hedge funds and retailers. Average people allied themselves directly on Reddit with discussions to be able to push the share price up and precisely hurt the hedge fund by triggering a short squeeze on hedge fund positions, and that caused a lot of discussion at the time. Why am I telling you about it here? because clearly it's the SEC that wants to impose this on hedge funds, and it's not going well. Imagine the SEC requiring hedge funds to simply announce which company they are shorting. And there, clearly, things are grinding their teeth, and there is very strong pressure that is taking place at the SEC level, especially since the SEC asked the hedge fund to disclose fees. And so there, it's the same. We find ourselves in a trial at the level of the SEC, so the SEC is not necessarily very well placed, and if it continues to strengthen there, we will have even more pressure at the level of the SEC, which adds to the existing pressure on other matters, and therefore we must not forget that the SEC does not only focus on cryptos but also on other things, and that is why we can have information there which changes a lot of things. If it is really validated that there is a publication at the level of the shorts, and even if it is not validated, it will imply that the SEC will be under sufficiently strong pressure to go back. Clearly, this is something that will be interesting to follow. I'm going to come back to the SP 500 in which we did our little retest here. Very clean, in which we did a little retest. We did a little bearish box. No very strong movement. I expected it to. There is a movement perhaps a little stronger. We have swallowed part of the candle. This week it will be decisive, in which we will have either a bearish continuity to really mark the first retracement impulse, second retracement impulse, third impulse to seek here the target of 4,100, or we remain in the establishment of a ranging form and a second potential retest at 4,464 before indeed making a bearish breakout. Do I see a very strong bullish recovery with a break of this level of 4,565? I do not think so. Currently, we are more in a dynamic of saying that we are going to look for a bearish continuity, which is a little bit the representation of what we experienced in February before having a breather. Will we be able to breathe right away? I don't think so. Especially when we look at the state of oil. We see that we are really accelerating. Inevitably, tensions in the Middle East, this has a huge impact on oil, and I think that we risk having a continuation of the acceleration to once again retest these levels of the 93. If we break our retest there, that's for sure. We're going to do 88 to 93 here in potentially 1 or 2 days. So really a big acceleration in oil, also implying a big acceleration in inflation, even if we remain at levels that we experienced the previous year. At the BTC level, we are still in this consolidation phase after the rupture of the AR in the accumulation, the brick-off accumulation that we recognize here. Big impulsive candle to break the AR and break the 25,000. Important level that we retest once, twice, and potentially that we are in the process of retesting a third time. The important thing to note is that here we have the RSI, which represents the momentum of the price, the momentum, the interest that we can give to the price level. And we see that we are in a form of compression, and therefore we have no effective movement. And in any case, this is confirmed here in the volatility. We see that we are sinking again in terms of volatility, which is symptomatic of a real period of lethargy in which we are not doing much thing. And at the same time, if we zoom out a little in this upper zone, we see that we are mainly in range zones with an upper part which is at 30,000, a lower part at 25,000, in which we are creating other ranges, which is what we are seeing here. See the range that we can categorize from a small range of 25,000 to globally, if we remove this extension there. Here, the top 27,500. Okay, so who is in the range in which we evolve, which is itself? Even in another range which is between 26,800 and once again 25,200. So there it is, not flow trading. It is really range trading, in which in addition we have political tensions which are arriving. We are in the process of setting up tensions at the level of the SEC versus the cryptos in general, and therefore it adds difficulties to have the establishment of a consistent and correct flow. So for me, we are in this dynamic where we have here the first acceleration. We are going to retouch the oneminous one objective of this bearish impulse and this retracement, so we are in something classic. There we retrace to take a breath, to then sink, which is the same principle as this retracement that we experienced here. All right? Bearish impulse, we retrace, we breathe. Second bearish impulse, we breathe. Third bearish impulse. For me, target always remains 25,900, we'll say 26,000, to retest this lower part. So we have something classic. So how far can we go? If we continue to zoom in, what's interesting to see is that we got the news about grayscale which came up. So here, we really have the news in which we went to straighten out this order block. We came back down almost straight away. And then we find ourselves in the classic upward acceleration, which we find on Sunday evening. I warn you of this almost every weekend, Sunday evening or Monday. 2 o'clock in the morning, we have an upward acceleration, almost 2 times on 3, not far away. So there we are really in this characterization. And what is interesting to see is that we went to retest here the top present and overall the two lows which are here. So there we still have a level of support which is relatively strong. I think that we should still have an acceleration also there, for me, to go and do this retest here. At 27,700 in fact, going to reinforce the retest that we already had present, and that would correspond in particular to the top of the range, okay? So for me it would be 27,400 until this retest here, 27,700. Why am I telling you this? So several things. In terms of order flow, I can clearly see an increase here in open interest. So therefore, in which we have indeed had this bearish breakout, and since we have been here, we are on an open interest, which is relatively high. We see the acceleration with the fall of the open terrestre, which was bought, so implying here the implementation of the short squeeze announced last week. We see that we are found in a level of the classic open terrestre. So that means that we mainly took up leveraged positions. Is it long? I want to tell you no. Here we have something which is completely flat. The upward movement has not been felt. Well, yes, just a little felt. Resold. So there's an actual profile shot here. For me, we are in a dynamic of upward acceleration leading to bearish continuity. And when we look at the level of liquidity flows here, we see that in fact we have a large block of liquidity which is always above to create a continuity of the short squeeze. Will we go very, very high? I don't necessarily think here, for me, the very high level is considered to be 27,700. Where we really have the big block of liquidity. We clearly see here this large block of liquidity which is waiting. So here it corresponds in fact to what we are seeing in terms of the graphs, in terms of the structure to force the positioning of the longs here to then do a long squeeze. Okay, it's seen a lot more in this way where we see that we did the short squeeze here to recover this area, so we recovered all this liquidity, but we are clearly strengthening the long equity. We see that we is in the process of strengthening long equity. And when we look here, we also see 27,800 large area of equity. So second bullish option to recover this part to then sink and make a bearish continuity a little. What we are used to seeing for some time is the principle of the range in which we are going to have. We are going to move on to this one. It is simpler. We are going to have effective movements in the different limits, but overall, every time we are going to have a movement, we will create the liquid. In this part, we will continue to make a bearish movement to consolidate at the bottom of the range to then liquidate all the people who are positioned in short. And so on. We will always have sub-movements to be able to reinforce low equity and so on. For me, it hasn't changed. We don't have bullish flows. We don't have bearish flows. There is no need to be bullish, to be bearish. For the moment, we are in a form of range. Yes, I tend to tell you that I always have my reload zone in mind. But to get to this zone, you absolutely have to break the 25,000, and it takes strength to break the 25,000. Currently, we don't have the volume, we don't have the equity to break the 25,000, we don't have the fundamental news to break the 25,000, so we're taking a step back. We're waiting as usual. Habit. And if we want to trade at that time, we don't do a flow trading. We do not do swing trading. We treat it like classic ranges. We are in an opportunity here to set up sales because we are at a high range in which we can set up sales to accompany the lower part. And here we are, really in a classic range trading. I hope you liked this video. If so, don't forget to leave me a like and a comment. It always makes me very pleasure, especially in the comments. You will be able to vote for tomorrow's analysis video at noon, so in which you have this list, which on the right do not offer me, like last time, cryptos, which are not in this list there. I will really stay in this list. So select tomorrow, 13:30. You will have the video you selected in the comments, and we meet again today at 13:30 for Nervos and its Crypto CKB.